Now this video is a little bit off the wall and you can thumbs it up if you like it and tell me if you don't, but this is a little look into Steve's Kitchen world and how my process, the thought process goes. We're doing that popcorn series. Graydon and Emily have asked for salt and vinegar popcorn, and I'm really intrigued because I love salt and vinegar chips, or crisps as we call them, and I've often wondered how they get that flavour on there. Now when I was younger we would make chips or crisps, and I tried putting vinegar on them and salt, and you just get soggy chips. I've seen a lot of recipes where people are making popcorn and they're adding salt and vinegar on, and it really isn't going to work. You're just going to get wet, soggy popcorn. So the old grey matter starts flowing around, and I'm thinking, well, if those corporations can make salt and vinegar flavouring, we can make it, and we can probably make it better. So let's start experimenting, let's start exploring. How did they discover the flavourings for salt and vinegar? Now, to find that out, you really got to look at the history of food. There are recipes going back many centuries that will tell you how to make travelling vinegar or dried vinegar. Now, I didn't really know a lot about this, but what they would do is they take a strong vinegar. Now, I've got myself apple cider, a nice strong apple cider. Get something really good if you want to follow along with this. This has still got the mother in there. Now, mother, by the way, and I'm going to side ramble here. You'll often see this blue bottle on my kitchen side over there. This is red wine vinegar, and the mother in here I've had for a long time. Every time I get a little bit of red wine left over, you can pour it in here and the mother will turn it into a beautiful red wine vinegar. So you are looking for a strong vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is fantastic because it packs a lot of flavour. How are we going to make this vinegar into a powder? Many years ago, what they used to do is they grind down some corn or grain of any sort until they got a fine powder, and they'd add the vinegar in with it to make a paste. And then they would roll it up into little balls and let it dry out, and that would give you a powdered vinegar that you could take with you and season food with. Fantastic idea. Let's give it a try. So here's what I'm thinking. We take a couple of heaped teaspoons of corn flour, which is the same as grinding it yourself, I guess. Now we call this corn flour, I think the Americans call it cornstarch. Then taking my wonderful strong apple cider vinegar, I'm just going to pour in, or maybe 3 or 4, let's just see how we go. There's 3 in there, start to give it a little stir through. I don't want it to be too wet, but I also don't want it too dry. Let's put another couple of teaspoons in there. So what I'm going to get is this Newtonian fluid. Now you can look that up if you don't know from your science days what that was, or if you used to make custard at home, you might also know it. It's almost solid, almost liquid. So what does that taste like? Let's just give that a little try. Yeah, that's packed some vinegar in it. Let's leave this to dry now, turn it into a powder. Now take a look at that. You see that has set. I had it out in the garden just for about 15 or 20 minutes. So that really didn't take long. Just come down and have a little look. If I push my finger into that now, you'll see that it's a powder. It's starting to powder up nicely. I'll just take a spoon and we'll just, it's almost like a chalk. So what I reckon is we'll just crumble this up a little bit. It still feels a little bit damp, but I reckon half hour or so that'll start to dry out even more. Now, let's have a little try of this, because basically all we've got here now is a strong vinegar and a corn flour or cornstarch. That is got a real vinegar kick to it. So is that what they do to make salt and vinegar crisps? Well, it might have been one of the things they used to do in the old days to put vinegar seasoning onto things. But if you look at the ingredients that are listed on a lot of salt and vinegar products, you'll see all sorts of strange chemicals on there which replicate the flavour of vinegar and the salty flavours, sometimes a little bit of sweetness. One of the most common things you'll see is a powder called citric acid, and occasionally something similar to tartric acid. Now, they're not as scary as they sound. They really are just the acids that come out of fruit like lemons and the zests and things. These replicate that vinegar, that sour flavour of vinegar, and I've always used them for baking, so I know they're fairly safe. So what sort of flavour are we going to get from tartric or citric acid? Let me have a little try so you don't have to. Tiny, tiny little pinch here. Oh, talk about warheads. That is sour, citrus, and a little vinegary. I can see why they use it. But the underlying flavour is not vinegar to me, it's getting towards those citrus sort of flavours. So I reckon what we've got to do is combine one of these fruit acids with this vinegar powder that I've made here. A little bit of salt perhaps, maybe even a little bit of sweetness, and then we're going to have that salt and vinegar flavour that we find on our favourite snacks. Maybe. Let's give it a try. So the experimenting begins. I'm going to take a little of our vinegar powder, just pop it down there, it's not quite dry yet. I'm going to go with the tartric acid, but let's put a few grains of tartric acid down there. And let's take a little pinch of sea salt. These are the flavours I think are going to give us that salt and vinegar flavour that we want. So let's just pull a little bit of salt into the centre here. Let's take a little bit of that tart acid. Now, before I add my vinegar powder, I'm just going to push down on that and give it a little try. Let's see if we're getting there at all. Yes, a little lemony perhaps, but I can see why they use a combination of these flavours for salt and vinegar. Come back down. We've got our salt and our tartric acid. Let me just move that one out of the way a minute in case. I'm going to bring a little extra tartric acid in there, a little of our sea salt, and let's bring some of that powder in that's got our vinegar flavour. Just going to mix this up a little bit, and then I'm just going to dip my finger in there. Got a nice big bunch of it there on the tip of my finger. Let's see what sort of flavour we're going to get. Wow. Probably a little too much of the tartric acid in there, but the underlying flavour is very close to our salt and vinegar. So you join me a day or so later and I have been experimenting with all sorts of different ideas. I've kind of gone off the idea actually of corn flour. It gave a real floury taste which I didn't like. Don't get me wrong, they clearly used to use this in the old days to get that vinegar seasoning, but we're kind of used to a much more potent vinegar flavouring on our snacks. Now I did research, there were some people using copious amounts of vinegar, mixing it up with baking soda and boiling it down until you got a crystallization. That seemed to be a possible idea, so I gave it a try, but the results were pretty disgusting. I had this powder, which can only be described, if you ever were a kid and you put a 9-volt battery on your tongue and got that, not forget the shock, but the taste that you got. That was what the powder tastes like, but it wouldn't go off your tongue. It stayed there for ages. It was quite disgusting. So that was thrown away. Now, I started to see the word maltodextrose on a lot of these products. Maltodextrose is a powder that looks a little like corn flour. It's a sugar. It's a derivative of corn syrup, but unlike glucose, it isn't that sweet. Look, if I give that a try, feels a little bit like a milk powder, not that sweet, and it does absorb other seasonings and flavours. So I tried adding this in with my strong vinegar, but it ended up a little bit like a taffy, not a great product. The more and more I looked into this, the more I saw that quite often they weren't using vinegars at all. They were using those acids that I mentioned, citric acid, tartric acid. Maltodextrose was often used, though 90% of the time I was finding this in the salt and vinegar crisps and popcorns. So with much experiment, I've come up to the conclusion that maltodextrose is the way to go. This is a product, by the way, that you can buy in a lot of health food shops. It certainly is sold in most homebrew places. It's used as a sugar to enhance the body of beer. So I've come up with a balance of using this, certain acids, and the right amount of salt, and I've come up with what I think is a pretty damn good salt and vinegar seasoning, not too difficult to make. Now, I'm not going to share the recipe, the final recipe with you here. Get and watch the salt and vinegar popcorn that's coming up very shortly on the channel, and if you try it, let me know. I'm not sure if it's perfect, but it's as close to perfect as I can make. I really hope you've enjoyed this sort of look inside to how I often develop my recipes. And if you like this sort of thing, I will try and do them again. Please comment down below and I will see you in the next video. Take care. Now share the love, give the thumbs up to the video if you've enjoyed it. Don't forget, I'm going to leave links here to the full popcorn series, and get across and check out all those wonderful popcorns. We've been making chocolate popcorn. I've got some rainbow popcorn over there as well. Get over, and also I will leave a link to another video. Please comment down below. See you next time. Take care.